Okay, I think we're pretty good. I'm just going to move these screens around and we'll make a start. Move that out of the way, move that up there. Okay, so I think we're up and running, and I know a lot of people will be sort of landing in slowly in the next minute or so, but we might as well jump right in. So good evening, everybody. My name is Emmett Major. I'm the Planet Youth Coordinator here in the west of Ireland, and I also work for the Goyers Common Education Training Board and the Western Region Drug and Alcohol Task Force. And we're, together with Lucy, putting on this webinar, this event, the seminar this evening called The Importance of Sleep for Our Teenagers, which we're going to talk you through in a minute. You're going to hear a huge amount from Lucy, and just a very short presentation from me. I'm going to ask you, Lucy, maybe if you could introduce yourself to the gang.
Thank you. Well, my name is Lucy Wolfe. I'm a sleep consultant and co-creational relationship mentor. I am the author of the Baby Sleep Solution and all about the Baby Sleep Solution as well. And I am mum of 4 children, and it's my pleasure to be here tonight.
Thanks for that, Lucy. And Lucy is really the main event. And the main purpose of this evening is to look at this whole area of sleep for our young people, sleep for our teen population, our teenagers. And I was going to talk you through a tiny bit of the background as to why we've come to this. I'm going to share my screen here quickly. Share screen R, share screen 2. And as I mentioned, I'm the coordinator of this program called Planet Youth. And anything you want to know or any bit more you'd like to know about Planet Youth is all through the planetyouth.ie website, which you can see here on the screen. So it's a public health program that we're trialing for use here in the west of Ireland. It's based on and emulates what's called the Icelandic primary prevention model, where they've taken this way of working, this prevention idea, and used it to great effect to improve health outcomes in a huge way for a whole generation of young people. So we're trying to copy them, essentially, and I'll tell you a tiny bit more about that in a second. It's a program that's been sponsored by most of the big statutory bodies out this part of the country. You can see our county councils and things like that mentioned here. You'll recognize things like TUSLA and the HSE, or our Education Training Boards, our task force, and so on. So it's an interagency push to see if we can get this model adapted for use here in the west of Ireland. So what we do here now every 2 years is what we survey all of the young people in Galway, Mayo, and Roscommon in their schools. Every 2 years they sit down and they fill in what's called a Planet Youth survey. It's a significant undertaking for them. The survey, the document itself, it's actually quite a bit longer than the Irish Census document. The first 2 versions in 2018 and 2020 were like this. They were fill in the little boxes. Very thorough, 28 pages long, asking them all about their lives, from life at home to life in school, life online, sports and hobbies, substance use, mental health, and on, right? Very, very thorough and detailed look, all using kind of validated scales and things like that. So you can see here, this is kind of one of the first surveys that was done. The big box in the bottom, the middle at the bottom there, that's the survey packaged just before it gets shipped to Reykjavik, where it was optically scanned and then returned to us here as a data set in Ireland, right? So what we have now is a complete picture of all of the young people at 15 and 16 in all of the schools in Galway, Mayo, and Roscommon. And we do this every 2 years, right? So what we're doing is we're trying to find out about their lives so we can develop interventions that influence risk and protective factors in these areas. How do we change and improve the landscape in these big domains of intervention they're called? So parents and family, leisure time, the peer group they're in, and their school experience, right? So what we do is we take the voice from the teenage young people, right, the 15 to 16-year-olds, and we bring it back in time so that we're using it to improve the situation for the children coming behind. These are their first years as they're coming into school at 12 and 13. But increasingly, the focus of the project will be very much for the parents, if you like, of the children that are starting out life in our national schools. So we have 470 national schools in Galway, Mayo, Roscommon. Around 6,500 to 7,000 parents start in our national schools here every September. We have 6,500 to 7,000 fresh-faced junior and young people, and we're trying to change and improve the landscape so that when they get to be the teenagers, things have improved for them, if that makes sense. So it's very much about prevention. And here in Iceland, what they managed to do was use this approach. They set out to use this approach to address what was the highest levels of substance use rates in the world at the time, of anybody that was counting. It was the highest for drunk in the last month, for cannabis use, for smoking, and it became a political problem and they decided they were going to do something about it. Hence this idea, we will develop a high quality preventative initiative, which nobody was doing at the time. It's the only thing that's working actually internationally to drive down these kind of numbers like this. So over the next 15 years, their substance use went from the highest in the world to the lowest in the world, and are now and have remained consistently the lowest substance use rates of any teenager in the world. And along the way, lots of other things changed and improved, like educational attainment, early school leaving dropped, physical activity went up, loads of other positive improvements. Okay, so here in Ireland, like I say, we're emulating this model. We're kind of invested into trying to get this to work here. We're looking at other areas of our young people's lives as well, because the same model will apply to make effective changes in all sorts of ways. So things that we want to do, certainly look at our substance use rates, which, by the way, are very high within our young people. Physical activity, screen use, mental health, sleep. You can see here on the screen the sort of things we're talking about. Okay, so we generate reports based on our data sets. These are all up on the website. You can see here the Mayo, the Galway, the Roscommon report. They're 52-page documents, very detailed. And one of the things we do now every September, like I say, is we distribute the parent power booklet. This is a thing that we give out to our parents that are coming into our junior infant schools. It talks about the importance of establishing good family routines early. So this could be, things like meal times or spending regular times with our kids. They're designed in such a way that you go through them with your young child. So what are we doing well? What could we do better? This is this idea about spending a quality time with our young people, basically, and connecting and active listening and stuff. So all that sort of stuff is mentioned. Okay, talks here about sleep and bedtime. So what we're trying to do is get the idea of having good routines established at quite a young age and an early age. Nobody really knows. Broadly speaking, when it comes to this kind of thing, you do roughly what your parents did, or you might look for advice as far as your sister or your brother or your sibling, but nobody really seeks out a lot of information when it comes to this kind of thing. And most people do okay. That's the fact of the matter, is most people get it fairly close. But it gets harder as the kids get older. So what we're saying is that the idea that if good routines are started very young, bedtime routines, relax before bed, these are really what bedtime should be. You're ahead of the game if you can start young. Okay, so we talk here about screen use. We talk about hobbies and sports. This is an area they invested in hugely in Iceland, where they pumped money into making a wide variety of extracurricular activities available for young people. Really interesting stuff. There's a lot of information about it online, in fact, on our website as well. But it's something that we're trying to develop here significantly in Ireland as a way of working, really. That we need to be investing more in our young people. I hope all this makes sense. So it talks a tiny bit about making changes at home, and then also this idea by parents working together from a young age. Let's say you're starting out in junior infants with 8 years ahead of you as national school parents. You can actually head off a lot of difficulty early on by coming to simple agreements with the other parents. So it could be, probably a very good example would be a 5-year birthday party. Who comes to the birthday party? Limit the birthday party to a fiver. That's a good example. Another good example would be the idea of the phones, the terror of the phone. So if we all agreed, all 20 of us, that nobody is going to get a phone until 6th class or the confirmation or the end of school, you've immediately removed that problem for the kids, for yourselves, and for the school, because it is a significant problem for a lot of schools in the playground as well. So by parents working together, you can achieve a huge amount. Hence the idea this project is called Parent Power, and we distribute these, as I say, to our national schools in the west of Ireland now as a website devoted to the project. And another thing we do every September is we distribute this guidelines booklet, the first year parent guidelines booklet, and there's a fridge magnet that goes with it, which is a sticker for bedtimes. These are sort of the correct ballpark bedtimes for young people as they're working their way through secondary school. And again, nobody knows. The young people will come in, after they started into first year, and everybody, everybody's going to bed at 10:30, and that's, is that the new bedtime? But not really. These are a little bit closer to the sort of territory we should be at. So the booklet talks about a tiny bit about the project, some of the results of the big survey, talks about the importance of keeping the family time and family routines going. The older the kids get, the less it may seem they want to spend time with their parents. But if you sit down with a group of young people and ask them about time with their parents, they will all say that they really value time with their parents, actually. But they don't say it to you, but they do, right? So the idea that can we keep the good communication going so that if there is anything at all, they can come and talk to us, and that the communication is always good. So that's just what it's trying to encourage. By the way, the data that we gather here, as I say, it's thorough. There is also a lot of really good news in our Planet Youth data. So the kids report really high here, because the Planet Youth program is done in lots of parts of the world now. And in Ireland, we show up incredibly high for some metrics around, like there's a good example, this 88% easy to get caring work from parents, which is lovely. School safety, community safety, their school experiences, loads and loads of really positive things within our data, and some things we definitely need to work on. Screen time guidelines, 50% of them would be 3 hours or more a day on social media. That doesn't include all the other things that we do. That's the social media stuff. As I said, the bedtime guidelines are in the booklet. We talk about hobbies and sports, the importance of keeping young people going in extracurricular. Doesn't have to be sports, by the way, and it's something that they've measurable in Iceland now after doing this for quite such a long time. The young people that are doing extracurricular are doing better in all sorts of ways than the kids who don't, but it doesn't have to be sports. It's very measurable as long as they're doing some kind of supervised structured activity that interests them. It could be music or drama or circus or cycling, or there's all sorts of stuff, cooking and so on and on and on. But it's something that they know now that it's a good idea just to keep them engaged in stuff that interests them. Substance use, as I say, we're kind of high here. 20% drunk in the last month was during the COVID restriction, so that was quite high, even though it had dropped a bit from the first survey. The current survey is showing us back up around 26, 27% drunk in the last month. So we're kind of back where we started 4 years ago. Cannabis use, about the same, slowly creeping up, I think, all the time a little bit. And we talk a tiny bit in the survey, in the booklet rather, about this idea of parental supply of alcohol. So 18% and 10% regularly get alcohol from a parent. That doesn't include the number that say they would occasionally get alcohol from a parent. So, and we just mention that because even though you can give alcohol to your own child, you're not really supposed to be giving alcohol to other children in Ireland, that come to your home. It's a bit of a no-no. Now, people do it because there's a lot of pressure on, and you'll start to get that when the kids are even as young as second year, in fact, but then third year. And once they get into TY, it's kind of a big thing that they'd have looking for a few cans before the disco. But we do know from the data from the last survey that it's the kids that are getting alcohol from a parent. The idea being, can we introduce them to alcohol responsibly and make, safer, better drinkers out of them? It doesn't appear to be the case. So instead of 20% of them being drunk in the last month, this cohort, 60% of them were drunk in the last month. So it's the sort of thing that we need to be a little bit more careful about as a society. And that was all. I'm not going to browbeat you about it. So just kind of coming on to the sleep, and I'll be handing you over to Lucy very shortly, right? But I just wanted to bring your attention to this a little bit. It's one thing that really jumped out in the second Planet Youth survey. Now, these surveys are conducted with a big number of young people. You can see there on the screen. So the amount of sleep with 4,473 young people at 15 and 16-year-olds. So these are the post-junior cert kids. So the kids who were in third year last year and have now come back to school, they all sit down and do the Planet Youth survey. And this is what they told us about their sleep. So 10% are doing okay at 9 hours. That's actually sort of the recommended territory there for that age group. 31% more, they're doing okay at 8 hours. So the 10 and the 31, 41% are doing okay. The 59% on the right, not so good, right? They're not doing as well at all. And the less sleep they're getting, the worse they're doing, which I'll show you here very quickly. When you correlate the sleep with the mental health, right? So these are the percentage of students that say they have good or very good mental health. Okay, it's a simple question within the data set. So you can see here that 67% of them that are sleeping well are going to report good or very good mental health. 62% then for 8 hours. And you can see immediately for 7 hours, it's gone to 45. If you're getting 6 hours sleep, only 27% of those kids will report good or very good mental health. And then 16%. Right. So that's the same picture for something called school engagement. And school engagement is it's a validated scale within the questionnaire that it's not just one question, it's 10 questions that basically measure how well are you able for school or how much are you enjoying school, right? And that's what school engagement means. It's not about academics, it's about being able for school and enjoying school. And again, the picture is absolutely clear that it's the kids who are sleeping better who are doing better here. And I have another presentation a little bit like this, which I won't bore you with, but if I was to put up a slide for anxiety, for self-image, for self-esteem, these are all, again, validated data for physical health, for school work, they would all show essentially the same picture to a greater, in fact, or a lesser degree. But everything is really, really closely tied into sleep. So in the 2018 and the 2020 survey, the question that is the question that was asked: how much sleep do you get on average? And those were, they could say 9 hours, 9 hours or more, 9 hours, 8 hours, 7 hours, 6 hours, less than 6 hours. They could answer those questions that way. So in the 2022 survey, which is happening right now, it started on the 7th of November and it's running to the 30th of November. So again, across the 91 schools in Galway, Mayo and Roscommon, our young people, post-junior cert young people, will sit down, around 5,000 of them, and fill in the Plenitude survey. And I was looking at it actually yesterday, and I'll just show you here quickly. So instead of this time of asking what time, this question at the top, so how many hours do you sleep on average every night? That's the standard question from 2018 and 2020. So we've asked that again because we want to keep consistency between the three surveys, but we've also asked these additional 6 questions. So what time do you usually go to bed on a school night? What time do you usually get to sleep on a school night? What time do you usually get up on a school day? Right, so we can do the maths on every child and see actually how much sleep are they getting. What time do you ever feel tired during the school day? Do you ever fall asleep during the school day? And do you have a phone in your bedroom at night, right? And it won't surprise you, I don't think, to see that that's the number for phone in your bedroom at night, 84.5%. Now, these numbers, this 84.5% is based on the survey, the 2020 survey as it currently stands. So since the 7th of November, 3,500 of our 5,000 young people that participate have done the survey so far. So this number isn't going to budge a whole pile more. 3,500 is pretty much, we're going to settle somewhere between 84 and 85%. It's going to maybe move a point of a percent from here on out. So we could safely say 84 to 85% of our young people have a phone in their bedroom at night, which is not the only issue that would be causing, our problems or correlations and lack of sleep. It's not the only thing by any means, but it's a really significant driver of this problem. So what to do about it, right? So one of the things that we do when we do this presentation in our first year parent nights here in the west of Ireland, right, is we do touch on this idea of parents working together, right? It's something that happens a bit more during national school, but as soon as parents get into secondary, this begins to fall apart. Sort of the friends change, the school is bigger, all of a sudden instead of having 20 parents, you have 100 in your year, and nobody can possibly know everybody at that stage. So what we're saying is, as parents, and it's commonly understood now, it's well understood in the data, that the schools and school communities where there's strong parent networks, the kids do better, right? So what we do is we try to encourage parents to get involved, to get to know other parents, to attend the school events, to introduce yourself to other parents, to make a valiant effort, I suppose I could say, to get to know the parents of the friends and the new friends, right? So that you can share information, because if you're worried about something, you can be damn sure the other parents are worried about something, but quite often people are too maybe nervous or standoffish, or, I better not say it because I must be seen as a bit of a crank, but it's not the case. If you're thinking it, everybody else is thinking it, almost certainly. So the idea that you could share information, really important. And the idea also of working together, really important. And one of the things we really encourage our schools out here to do as part of the first year piece, and this idea that we're supplying this guidance around bedtime and so on, is that if all of the parents of all of the first years agree on starting out life in school to have the phones handed up to be charged at 8 o'clock, you've immediately removed the problem for everybody, because the chit chat and the Snapchat and the back and forth and the TikTok and all of that is, if the phone's in the bedroom at night time, I need it for my alarm and all that stuff, and it goes chirp and buzz or beep and all of that stuff, they're not able to really regulate themselves around phones. We're not even that good at it as adults, truth be told. So giving a child a phone into the room and say, you manage that now, it's not that simple. If it goes buzz, they have to reach for it, right? And it will disturb them. So what we say, if enough parents get the phone out of the bedroom, it will have a significant effect. So we say 2 things to the parents here, really. One is, by working together, one thing to get the phone out of the bedroom, and the other one not to be giving them the booze when they come asking for it at 14 and 15 for the disco. Because again, that it doesn't bode well. Our young people that drink early and drink regularly young are the ones who show up in treatment later in life. It's a really, really, really explosion in risk by starting your drinking career young. So the best thing you can do is just try to defer, try to negotiate, try to push it off as long as you can, get another year out of it if you can. And that's really the best thing for the long-term health. Similarly, it's very clear now, sleep is possibly our biggest preventable health problem for our young people. And I presume, Lucy, you'll talk us through this a bit in a minute, that, you know, these habits that are set young, you know, these, you know, it becomes a long-term, a lifelong preventable health problem, I think, as well. So I'm going to shut up very shortly. If you want to find out any more about the project, you can find it at planetyouth.ie, right? If you want to submit a question as the webinar goes, you can also do that at info@planetyouth.ie. You can put it up on chat as well. I'm going to be trying to monitor the chat, and I'll be pulling out the questions. I'll be sticking them into a separate document here, a Word document that we'll go through with Lucy at the end of the evening. We'll be trying to cover as many questions, many specific questions as we can. If you want to send a question, you can do it private message it, or on the chat, or you can email it into that address, and I'll happily put it to Lucy if we have time at the end. So the thinking is we'll probably run with Lucy to something, well, you'll know Lucy better than I, but I'd imagine it'll be something around the 8 o'clock territory. And then what we'll do is we'll spend until 8:15 going through any additional questions and trying to cover any additional ground. On top of that, we're finished, by the way, strictly at 8:15. I'll be trying to put a recording of this as well as my slides, Lucy's slides, and up online on Friday. I will email everybody that registered for this webinar. I'll email you all a link to the recording, a link to the slides, and I'll also send you a copy of that guidelines booklet as a PDF, a soft copy PDF, because I know we'd have a lot of parents here that aren't from our patch of the country. That's more or less it. I was asked to say one final thing. This is kind of the Drug and Alcohol Task Force Awareness Week this week. So this is part of the reason why we run this session this evening. But a colleague of mine, Neil Wilson, has asked just to mention this because he has an event tomorrow evening, which is talking about this topic, teenagers and cannabis products. So these would be like things like vaping and cannabis edibles and that kind of stuff. So if any parents have any curiosity or concerns at all about that sort of territory, you'd be very happy to see you, no doubt, as he goes through this tomorrow evening. And if you want to book a place, you can do so at the wrdatf.ie website, which is at the bottom of the screen there. And I might stick a link to that up in the chat as well. If people could maybe, I'll just give you a link to that too. So that's it. Enjoy. I know, Lucy, you have a wealth and a pile of information to get through and cover. So a lot of what people's questions are going to be covered by Lucy. I'm going to shut up at that, stop sharing. I'll turn my screen off, Lucy, and I'll let you rip. And we'll come back to the questions maybe around 8 o'clock.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Emmett. Thank you. And thank you all for attending this evening. I think some of the information that Emma has given you already, I'm a parent of 4, which I mentioned earlier. My oldest is 20, 18, 15, and 12. So I guess I'm a parent of teenagers and young adults and adolescents. And I guess when I spoke to Emmett maybe 2 or 3 years ago, that information, that data was what really motivated me to become involved in this. And in case your own teenager didn't remind you today, the crucial process in the teenage years really is about our children, becoming their own person, about becoming independent, taking responsibility for themselves and their own actions. And it's about them finding the safety to be true, real and authentic. And as parents, our task is to provide this kind of psychologically safe, warm, responsive, attentive family culture with unconditional loving responses, boundaries and understanding, while we kind of host this amazing process that isn't without its challenges. The challenges are primarily concerned with our children finding their own particular way of open and real expression to the several aspects of themselves. And of course, as this gorgeous, amazing process is unfolding, so too is their sleep profile changing from their younger years. And I guess we'll probably all realize and know, even just based on what Emmett has said, that, sleep is entirely necessary to ensure that our children and we are optimally functioning. Sleep, as a process, isn't just rest. While we're sleeping, our brain and our body is repairing and restoring, and it's supervising what I might describe as being a wide variety of biological maintenance jobs that are supporting the immunity, the muscle growth, our emotions, and brain processing, so that they ensure that our children, we are as adults, and our children can function at optimal levels by day and live a nourishing and healthy life. And unfortunately, without adequate sleep, there is a burden on our children's health and well-being, which I think is actually clearly demonstrated with the slides that Emma was showing you. And I guess I'll just break it down slightly more, that when we are sleep deprived, not getting enough sleep, we tend to have poor judgment, lack of motivation, inattention, and decision-making, risky decision-making. Obviously, lack of sleep has a huge influence on our mood. We can be more vulnerable to depressive symptoms, and there are obviously associated links to suicidal ideation. We had an increased risk for be overweight, and of course for our young adolescents who are beginning to drive. Of course, inexperienced drivers are higher risk, of course, if they are also sleep deprived too. And of course, you can see, as Emmett was describing, there's that link between, mood and behaviour, school engagement, and the loss of sleep. Tying back in with what Emma has said about how much sleep our children need in this age group, the general recommendation between 12 and 18 years is between 8 to 10 hours in the overnight period. And again, we focus on quantity of sleep, and we also put emphasis on quality of sleep as well. Quality of sleep, it's a hard one to measure, but I guess it can be impacted by overuse of electronic media, diet, and so lots of children are getting enough sleep, but that sleep maybe isn't a deep restorative sleep. So we look at the two items, quality and quantity, in equal measure, and put equal emphasis on both, if I'm honest with you. And although ultimately I try not to put too much emphasis on amount of sleep, we're always trying to aim for minimum or in between the 8 to 10 hours to try and ensure that we're helping our young children get the sleep that they need. Sleep itself is, it's governed by two systems, the homeostatic drive and the circadian rhythm. So the homeostatic drive is the pressure that builds up when we're awake, and it is released when we sleep. Ultimately, falling asleep and staying asleep are all rooted in our biology, and our sleep has matured over the years. The onset of puberty is linked with changes to how our children or our teenagers or young people experience their sleep. But it's just about starting to understand that we've got these two processes, the homeostatic drive and the circadian rhythm. So the circadian rhythm is a powerful internal clock. It's nestled in the brain, and it's like a biological pacemaker. It controls, our initiation to light and our dark in the pattern of day and night. And it sends messages on a 24-hour basis, and it influences our wake pattern and other biological processes. As bedtime approaches, our temperature begins to drop, and the levels of our sleep-inducing hormone melatonin rises in preparation for sleep. And towards the morning time, cortisol rises, and that alerts the body to waken. Ideally, the alignment of these two processes predicts the maintenance of wakefulness and alertfulness during the daytime and the maintenance of daytime sleep. The ideal balance between these systems is challenged during adolescence, as both processes show developmental changes and behavioural and social demands and choices further alter the balance. As well as that, obviously, there are two types of sleep. I'm going to pretend that maybe you do know about it, sorry, to say that there's two types of sleep. There's REM sleep and there's non-REM sleep. Non-REM sleep has three of its own stages. So ultimately, we all transition through 4 stages of sleep, and we alternate through those phases of sleep in the overnight period. And there's a combination of light sleep and deep sleep. And I won't bore you with how we go through those, but each cycle in its entirety is about 90 minutes, and we transition through those phases. And as we transition through those phases, we have partial arousals. And it's often when we have that partial arousal is that we sometimes wake up. And we can talk about that a little bit later on as well. There are developmental changes and psychosocial influences on sleep in adolescence. So the sleep-wake behavior changes, and you may already be seeing that. And it's the product of changing regulatory sleep mechanisms and the evolving, I guess, psychosocial factors. A hallmark behavioral change is that bedtime is getting later, and we do seem to see that the onset of puberty is linked to this. Also, around this time, parents' set bedtimes become less common. Staying up later to study, to train, to spend time on electronic media, all contribute to later bedtimes. And I suppose we know, even from Emmett's data, that our young children are spending, Emmett's number was 50% of them spending more than 3 hours on their gadgets, and we know like the figure is possibly higher than that. Studies reflect that the light from the media screens may delay the circadian system and promote increased alertness, which kind of already exacerbates the already delayed circadian system of our young people, and in turn reduces the amount of sleep that they achieve. Later bedtimes and the necessary early wake time that is governed largely by school start times further reduces the sleep opportunity for the average teenager. And I guess one question that comes up a lot is whether we can make up for sleep loss from during the week. And although attempts can be made at that, the attempts to make up for the loss often fuel the further cycle where we have what we kind of describe as being social jet lag, where we are finding it difficult to get to sleep, have to wake up at a certain time, so we're not getting as much sleep. We sleep in on the weekend, which then further pushes out our circadian rhythm and our sleep onset, and can end up with this a vicious cycle, as I might call it. Sleep irregularity further adds to a lot of the reported issues that parents and young people report. So common sleep issues are represented by trouble falling asleep, not being able to switch off, waking up at night, having a restless sleep, and not feeling well rested. Often in this cohort, the issues of not feeling well rested are parent and teacher reported, as the young person themselves may not truly realise how the sleep loss and their relationship with sleep is affecting their being, their thoughts, their feelings, and their behaviours. When I'm talking about sleep in primary school and in this adolescent age range, I try to bring it all back to relationship and understand that obviously it is multidimensional, the force factors that impact our children. And I look at the relationship that we have with sleep and the influences on our environment, our activity, our food, our diet, and things like that. So as well as these biological factors and this emerging chronotype that influences your young person's sleep pattern, their ongoing understanding and relationship with sleep, with you and themselves and their peers, has a significant impact. I put a huge emphasis on the relationship with the sleep environment, their activity, their food, their drink, and choices. And the example that we are showing them too all has an impact on their sleep tendency. And of course, at this age, you may already be discovering that peers have a significant influence on all of the aspects of our young person's sense of self and their fear of missing out, that is stimulating like an inherent need to belong at all costs. Outside of the scope of tonight's presentation, but I will mention it, is that obviously there are often underlying medical issues such as food sensitivities and intolerances, upper respiratory issues, sleep apnea, sleep disordered breathing, skin problems, dental issues, that all may have an impact on our children's and our own sleep, in fact. But of course, as I mentioned, it's outside the scope of this talk tonight, but I will encourage you to speak with your GP, your health visitor or practitioner, or your dental practitioner as well. And I will now talk to you about the relationship with the environment, because often when we're talking about our young children's sleep, there are things that we can begin to initiate that are almost considered what I might consider to be quick wins, like, so looking at the bedroom environment and ensuring and knowing that ideally the bedroom itself itself is the coolest room in the house come bedtime, and this can help to initiate the sleep hormone production. And of course, in this age group, we often talk about the bedroom itself for nighttime becoming like a cave-like environment, so that we know the dark is important to initiate the sleep hormone and to encourage the transition from awake to asleep. And I would always get parents to think about, in collaboration with their teenager, to consider the senses, what they're seeing. Is it cluttered? Is it uncluttered? What does it feel like? Have you invested in a quality mattress? Have you replaced it recently? The bedding, do they appreciate the feel, the texture? We actually know from studies that children who have an affinity to their pillow actually sleep better. So again, we're looking for the accessories in the bedroom to also complement what we're looking for, and investing in comfortable sleep clothes, and remembering to always get changed for bed, so that, of course, we're helping a signal to our brain to transition from awake to asleep. And in tandem with that, I would suggest that we try to avoid falling asleep anywhere other than the bed itself. And on top of that, avoid using the bed for anything other than sleep when possible. And I know that isn't always possible, but it can become important to create a distinction between a study and a hangout area, and whenever possible to reserve the bed for sleep, so that we're programming the brain to indicate that the only thing that happens in bed is sleep, so that there isn't a level of confusion there where we end up lying in our bed for hours, the brain being confused about what it's supposed to do. And again, just going back to the dark environment, blackout blinds, curtains, avoiding lights, hall lights, bathroom lights, and if you needed to, I would use a night light, but I would avoid it in the eye line and make it discreet. And I'd even encourage an eye mask, and of course, quiet. Avoid loud or sudden noises. Sometimes if we're living in a noisy spot, white noise can be a good barrier for unwanted disturbances. But I also want to just draw your attention to the fact that the way that sleep is designed, and the way that our bodies have evolved, we need to feel safe in order to fall asleep. And if there are conditions that we fall asleep under, so for example, if music is playing or the television is on when we fall asleep, but then it turns off, as we transition through those sleep cycles that we mentioned briefly earlier, and we have those partial arousals, if the brain gets the sense that things have changed, what the primitive brain thinks is that it's not safe, and that often encourages waking up. So basically, when we're looking at sleep and we're looking to the maintenance of sleep, it's important that the conditions that we fall asleep under are maintained the same throughout the course of the night. So it's just something to bear in mind when we're looking at ways to help ourselves and our children get to sleep. I'll also tie that in with the relationship to activity. And I think it's really important that we really get our children involved in their own sleep processes, so that we discuss the importance and the value of sleep, and to explore as a topic, gather their own insights and see if we can identify key areas of interest that may help motivate them. So if you have a budding sports person in your household, it's important to tell them how, their muscle development and their speed is often determined by how much sleep they get. If your young person is particularly interested in doing well in school, then of course their brain is better when it's rested and will perform and retain. Their concentration levels will be much higher. So sometimes it's just trying to find an area that they are interested in, and then linking it back to sleep, so they can become invested in their own sleep tendencies. And as we navigate this topic with our children, then I think it's worth looking at agreeing and committing to what might be described as suitable bedtime. When we're looking at bedtimes for this age profile, I guess we have to pay attention to the fact that this hormonal shift that happens means that lots of our children cannot go to sleep at an early time anymore. So when they were very young and in the early years, then their bedtimes were generally early. They have become later just by design. And so how do we figure out what a normal or a typical bedtime needs to be? One way is to think about when they feel tired. When do they feel tired? And tie in that to the bedtime. And also another way is to do the backward calculation based on the time they have to be awake in the morning, and working backwards how much sleep we're suggesting they might need in order to try and arrive at what a bedtime might be. Bedtime is the time we turn the lights out. And before we ever turn the lights out, we're going to talk shortly about what we do in advance of that, because have to create a long lead time before the lights ever go out in order to try and enable the transition from awake and alert to ultimately getting to sleep. I think if they can understand that it's important to be regular, and that ties back into the circadian rhythm that I briefly mentioned earlier. The body thrives on regularity, and that means regular wake times, which are very typically governed during the week by school. But then trying to have the same wake time every day, 7 days a week, without too much of a variation. An hour is typically the guidance, that we don't let that variation go beyond an hour, because otherwise we end up with the social jet lag that I mentioned earlier. So that we have a regular wake time, we complement that with a regular bedtime that maybe we're trying to figure out with them as we support them around it. And again, sometimes it's worth kind of making some agreements that, we start to understand the sleep process a little bit more. We know the environmental pieces that help. We also know that everything that we do has an impact on our sleep. So again, waking at a regular time and having, let's say, this regular bedtime, which we'll talk a little bit more about shortly. But I put a lot of emphasis on the morning time, because the morning time sets the tone for the rest of the day. So first of all, I'd avoid the snooze button, because that can impact our sleeping pattern. Just set the alarm clock for the time we need to get up at, and discourage that ongoing snooze piece. And again, that ties in with the recommendations that I'll make shortly about electronics in the bedroom. It's probably worth investing in a conventional old-fashioned digital alarm clock, or a clock that doesn't do a whole lot other than just tell the time. And within that we set the alarm to go off. We can get up in the morning without pressing the snooze button, and that we can have what I might describe as being a post-sleep ritual, which is as important as the bedtime routine that you'll remember instigating when our children were much younger. So that it's important in the morning that we're not hugely rushed, that we're not stressed out when we wake up and need to leave the house, and that we're not rushed. And remembering that points of connection still are first thing in the morning and last thing at night for our children, and that we try to make an effort around that. Initiating exposure to bright and natural light, especially in the morning, is proven to have positive indicators as the day unfolds. Committing to maybe 10 minutes of daylight before we ever move on with the rest of the day, and allowing for plenty of outdoor activity and fresh air for the course of the day. And then, of course, countering that as the evening unfolds with dimmed lights in the household. And again, even looking at lamp lighting rather than overhead lighting in the evening time, because there is a school of thought that potentially the overhead light is similar to the sun in the sky. And of course, don't forget, lots of our sleep problems have come from the modern world, where we have electricity and everything's on a 24-hour basis, and now we have to try and simulate morning and evening time in order to try and help regulate our body clock. Unpopular, I know, but I definitely would recommend that whenever possible we avoid training or exercise within 2 to 3 hours before bedtime, whenever possible. Very aware, along with my own children, they have lots of extracurricular activities, and some of them do involve strenuous activity quite close to sleep time. But whenever possible, just to bear that in mind, and especially when we're particularly struggling with our sleep. I'd also put emphasis on the relationship with food and drink, and just briefly mention that it's important to eat and drink at regular times in the day, because we are regulating the body clock, getting up, eating and drinking, trying to encourage breakfast. I know it can sometimes be a struggle. That'll help regulate the blood sugar levels and kickstart the metabolism. And of course, while we talk about lots of things with our young children, it's important that we avoid the caffeinated products, the alcohol, the high sugar, the refined carbohydrates, and obviously nicotine, that can all act as stimulant and deeply impact our sleep onset, maintenance, and sleep totals. Just for example, for caffeine, takes 3 to 7 hours to eliminate it from our system, and longer depending on the intake levels. So I suppose best avoided entirely whenever possible, but specifically in the afternoons and the evening setting. And to be mindful of over-the-counter medication that contains caffeine, as well as the popular energy drinks that I know all of our children are keen to sample. And in tandem with the exercise piece, we also try and avoid heavy meals 2 to 3 hours before bedtime too. But on the flip side of that, not to be going to bed hungry, but then we can look at sleep promoting foods like light supper of banana, wholemeal, oatmeal, dairy, honey, some nuts and seeds, all have sleep promoting qualities embedded within them so that we can use them to our advantage. I know Emma's briefly mentioned this as well, but I guess I probably need to go there in terms of the relationship between electronic media and screen use. And I know that from a poll by the National Sleep Foundation found that adolescents with less than 4 media devices in their bedroom got significantly less sleep on both school and non-school nights, and were more likely to fall asleep in school while doing homework. And they also were more inclined to drink caffeinated products. So again, it's a little bit of a vicious cycle that happens. On the other hand, and this is similar to Emmett's results, adolescents who report hours sleep compared to their peers, they had less technology after 9 p.m. So again, we can see how that ties in. And of course, that's going to help inform some of the recommendations that I will continue to make this evening. And just interestingly, another study found that children who slept with just a small screen in the bed or next to their bed, in the bedroom rather, they got 20 minutes less per night. And children with a television in their bedroom seemed to get about 18 minutes less sleep. So again, I know we're talking about minutes, but when we are already talking about a high sleep deprivation in a lot of our teens, these minutes make a difference. So just paying attention to the timing and the type and the timing of the device, overuse of electronic media is definitely impacting sleep negatively and increases daytime sleepiness too. So it'll be no surprise that I'm going to recommend to avoid TV and electronics at least an hour or more before bedtime. And I think it's probably one of our hardest tasks. Now, I think they're all hard, all the tasks, but I think it's important to set a loving boundary around this. The earlier you can do it, the easier it actually is. But a deep and open conversation are generally required. And also us as parents setting the example too can be helpful alongside keeping electronics completely out of the bedroom, potentially after a certain time. When we create a digital boundary, it's important that we replace the activity with another activity that serves to calm and relax. I generally loop that back into parent time and connection because just like Emma's state is showing you, our children, though sometimes they can feel resistant to being with us, most of them want to spend time with us, and it's about finding ways to connect. And once we take away or we look for agreement to have the gadgets finished by a certain time, in overlap that with our input, our attention, our availability can also be a helpful replacement. Might be a surprise to you hear me suggest that bedtime or bedtime routines and wind downs commence about 1 to 1.5 hours before the time we turn out the lights. So that's a long lead time. That's what's necessary to help encourage the brain and the body to make this transition in a smoother way. I normally split it into 2 parts, where I allow for 30 minutes to up to 1 hour of relaxing activity outside of the bedroom, coupled with 20 to 30 minutes in the bedroom itself before lights out. I'm going to give you a couple of ideas of what those activities might look like. And of course, I always encourage you to kind of think about what feels right for you as a family. So some activities I might promote for the first part of the wind down, and we do that in the living space, dim things down, close things down, use lamp lights rather than overhead lights, create a nice environment, listening to music, reading, word searches, crosswords, drawing, colouring, puzzles, jigsaws, straightforward family time, board games, gentle exercises, yoga, meditation. Don't forget, it's the deep-seated need of our children to feel seen, heard, loved, safe and secure and belonging to the family unit. And often in this age group, they show us everything other than that. But it's really important that we keep nurturing and fostering this really responsive family culture that we've been working on since the moment that our children were born. Our children of all ages will flourish with our loving presence, and just lots of dialogue, lots of eye contact, lots of availability, active listening, and being wholly available to them while we try to avoid being distracted by modern technology. I know, as a parent myself, that can often feel like a lot of work, but if it makes it easier for them to get to sleep, if it makes the transition to sleep more congruent for them, then of course they're getting better rested, mood and behavior improves, eating improves, everything tends to improve. So it's worth investment if it's possible. And then I move to the bedtime routine itself that would be in the bedroom that your child is going to sleep in. And again, this follows preparation like the teeth, makeup removal. Some of our children will have a bath or a shower. And again, that has been a very what would I say, traditional wind down activity, and helps to lower the body temperature. And again, we're helping to initiate that with the cooler room as well. And sure, our body knows what it needs to do too. I encourage the same ritual every night. And this can be with you or without you, based on what fits for your family. My own children at this stage do this bit on their own. But again, it'll be whatever feels right for you. We encourage that we limit the bedroom activities to maybe 3 to 6 items. That could be chatting with you and reading themselves, doing some relaxing exercises, some breathing exercises, visualizations, meditation, can of course listen to music again, and then it's time for lights out. So we've taken it into 2 parts and then lights out. Now, of course, I'm well aware that the relationship to thoughts, feelings, worries, and concerns arise hugely. In fact, reports of stress and anxiety make up more than 40% of sleep challenges that experience. The unwanted thoughts, feelings flood the mind, increasing adrenaline, and that encourages a fight, flight, and freeze mode that can make going to sleep and returning to sleep very challenging. The more the individual tries to not worry about certain things, the harder we try to get sleep, the more elusive it becomes, which creates a cycle of tension and psychologically between the person and their sleep. So in order to try and to address a cycle of tension, it's necessary first to establish the root of the issue, see the meaning and the metaphor of what is showing up. Sometimes it's helpful to seek professional guidance to help your young person and you to understand what's causing the anxiety in the first place, and uncovering the true source of what lies hidden increases understanding and will help further their journey to their own authenticity, but it also will help them, with their relationship with sleep too. Easy wins, journaling, very helpful to help reflect and work through what's arising for the individual. And also on the other side of that, it can be helpful to keep a sleep diary that can help us identify vulnerable areas as well. I know that Emma mentioned earlier that we're going to post the slides later on. With the slides, I'll include a breathing awareness exercise that you can help your young person start to initiate when the lights go out. And I'm also going to include a body scan exercise as well, because once we get into bed, then the practice of going asleep begins. And that's often where the thoughts, the feelings, the worries come out. And again, focusing on breathing or the body scan exercise can be a helpful way trying to relax the body, even just focusing on your surroundings, how the blanket feels on you, what you're hearing, what you're seeing, and not to fight the worry either. One of the hardest things that we do is try to make ourselves not worry, and then of course that makes the worry even worse. And of course, just to remind you that although we can use music, or sometimes I don't want to say the television, but I know people do use it. But if we do use music, just remember that if music is playing when we get to sleep, the brain may seek it out through the night, which often is what we might describe as being a sleep stealer. On the flip side of that, if going asleep happens and then we wake up in the overnight, one popular school of thought historically was to get up and go and do something in another room and then try and come back to sleep. I typically recommend that when we wake up, that we avoid getting up and doing something, because this sometimes can just train the brain to get up and go and do things. So often it would be a case of resting in the bed and maybe again using the breathing exercises. You might read or listen to music, but just be making sure that you're picking suitable material is sleep focused rather than something that's going to stimulate you. And to discourage a focus on time, so the time on the clock and amounts of sleep. We just focus on being present and mindful and on the breathing, as I've mentioned, and really try to rest even if they cannot sleep, because otherwise we keep getting into that cycle, unfortunately. Obviously, there are some natural suggestions that I might suggest to support sleep, rest and relaxation. Again, easy wins, magnesium spray, an Epsom salt bath, essential oils, chamomile, lavender. For example, you can look at natural body sprays, body lotion that contain those ingredients like camphor, vetiver, chamomile, obviously chamomile tea or lavender tea if your child is open to it. And sometimes I often in my practice recommend a salt air purifier as well, which is good for the sinus and upper respiratory issues like asthma as well. As you work through encouraging and supporting our teen, we are instrumental in that process. It is a case of us trying to help them figure out what feels good for them, to set those loving boundaries. We can really assist this process by continuing to reflect on our own sense of self, continue to express that unconditional love and really meet our children where they're at. Open communication is so important. And of course, I'm always going to couple that with active listening. So listening with our whole selves to our children and how they are experiencing, not just their sleep, but how they are experiencing their holding world of family, school, community. Be open, be present to their different opinion and value and respect their opinions, because this is what's now emerging. And again, remembering that their deep-seated need is to feel seen and heard, which that helps the inherent need to belong. So just continue to find ways to get to know them, express belief in their capacity. So be positive in your feedback, help them take responsibility and be really available to hold them where they're at. Obviously, you're going to stay emotionally present, but just remember those key times, morning times, meal times, bed times. They're so critical to the developing sense of self that is emerging. And just create natural opportunities for engagement. And when it comes to our communication with them, really try to come from the I place as much as you possibly can. I know that initiating change can be hard for any household. I know that there's a huge competition of needs that exists within busy houses, coupled with the social pressures, the study, the extracurricular demands, and understanding that for our teenagers, this perfect storm is erupting, their identity shift, as well as this hormonal shift that has this big impact on the way they experience their sleep. Collaborate with them, be attuned, problem solve and resolve together so that they feel like it's a team effort, that they're being given lots of autonomy within that. And it can be helpful just to make one step change at a time, and just be continually mindful of all the force factors that are having an influence on their sleep and their sense of self as well. So Emmett, I know you probably have a few questions for me, so it might be a good time for us to sift through them.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for that, Lucy. And just a couple of things I'll touch on before we do that is that there was quite a few things in chat asking about slides. So I'll just reiterate, I'll take that out of the, maybe I'll get rid of that sticky thing, but I can stick it back up there. But so on Friday, what I'll do is I'll put a recording up of the webinar on Friday online, together with a copy of the slides I presented and the slides that Lucy was working off. So you will be able to download a PDF copy of the slides, by the way. It won't be a PowerPoint copy. It'll be simpler to download it as PDF. So anybody that registered for the webinar, because of that, and you were getting the reminder emails, I'll have your email address. So everything will go up on the Planet Youth website on Friday, and I'll be sending out an email to everybody saying when that's happened. So you'll be able to go and have a look at the recording and have a look at the slide decks as well. And I'll also send a copy of that little parent guideline booklet, which has the guidance around what sort of charity bedtimes should be aiming for, really. And we'll get to the questions. So in a sec, a couple of ones I'll just address here very quickly there was one that came up, which is a common enough one, because we're doing, with the Planet Youth study, it's not a longitudinal study, it's a cross-sectional study that's done every 2 years of that age group. And by all means, so the question was kind of coming in, and a couple of people were thinking this correlation between the sleep and the mental health, it was really, really significant. The kids who were sleeping better, that question around mental health is a very simple question to the children. How would you feel about your mental health? Is it good? Is it very good, good, okay, bad, very bad? And it falls off a cliff, that question. It's a really simple question. But if we look at the same thing for what are validated scales within the data set, so for example, there are lots of questions that when you add them up and reverse scale them and all the rest, it'll add up to anxiety, depression, self-image, self-esteem. All these other scales show the same picture, right? So there's a huge, huge correlation between sleep and mental health. But the question that was put was, well, what comes first? Is it poor mental health leads to poor sleep, or is it poor sleep seems to correlate to mental health? And there's no easy answer to that. But what I will say is that In my opinion, right, a very significant driver of the lack of sleep, right, is related to phones in bedrooms and screen use in bedrooms. And somebody noted in the comments as we've gone by that their 12-year-old, who's I presume just started school in first year at 12, a young starter, has their phone handed up and the phone's still chirping with Snapchats at midnight when mum's going to bed, right? And I have the same issue. I have a 13-year-old who's starting first year, and she hands her phone up at 8 o'clock and the phone is chirping with Snapchats at midnight from her peer group in her school who have phones and are up with their phones at midnight. So that is a really significant part of the problem. But by all means, young people who have, sort of pre-established or pre-existing mental health concerns or worries or poor mental health, absolutely that will begin to impact the sleep. So there's a little bit of both in there, but a huge part of it is related to going to bed too late and screens in bedrooms. And so with that now, we'll come on to the questions here. Is that okay, Lucy? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's one. So some of these came on an email. I was trying to monitor their chat. I'll talk a lot of the questions off chat as well. But my daughter's 13, and for some time now wakes to use the toilet. She doesn't have an infection. I've checked with the GP. Finds it difficult as well to sleep at night. Tried books and magazines, winding down. It's not working. She's not allowed a phone in her room. Tell her to retire at 10ish, but she's never tired. It takes her hours to fall asleep. So there's a few different things there. Okay, so wakes at night to use the loo a lot.
So I'm sure you've already looked at lots of the obvious things like limiting drinks in the in the evening time. I'd also look at whether she is any bit constipated and if that's having an effect on her needing the loo, because often the bowel pressing on the bladder, initiating the feeling of needing to go to the bathroom. So I'm trying to investigate those things. And then I start looking at, like, I can hear, like you're saying, it takes hours to go to sleep. What we talked about tonight was having that long lead-in time before we ever turn off the lights. And I think that's a big part of helping the transition to actually go to sleep with greater ease. I think it's really important to mention that some of our young people are unable to go to sleep much before 11 o'clock because of their biology, because of the way they're developmentally progressing at this moment in time, which is why we have this big challenge, because we have school start times, we've got school commute times, and all these things feed into that. But again, if we have that regular wake time, we do our best to expose to bright and natural light. We look at the diet, we avoid the foods, we begin the wind down, and we start to initiate these things. Then the hope is always that these changes can start to create some sense of things feeling different. And of course, I'll always encourage you to rule out anything from an underlying medical condition where that's concerned in terms of needing the loo. But again, just to do the wins that you can initiate yourself, just to explore them a little bit more.
Any thoughts, Lucy, on, sorry if there's a bit of feedback, any thoughts on reading till you fall asleep, reading in the run up to bed, or putting the book down before bed, or any thoughts on that whole general territory of reading before bed?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a really positive way for a lot of people to relax before bedtime. And I know that there is sometimes a discussion about Kindles, and because they constitute a screen, even though it's a different type of LED light. I personally use a Kindle to read before I get to sleep, and I think reading essentially, and the reading material, it's important that you're conscious around what you're reading, that it isn't going to stimulate you too much either. I think that reading, listening to music, and I think I saw a mention in the chat about listening to like an audible book. Of course, these things are all really positive. I always just express that note of caution about things that are happening when we get to sleep, then sometimes the brain's seeking them out. But again, if getting to sleep is the problem and staying asleep isn't, then of course we just focus on that temporarily, and we can always, pull things back later on.
Any way to induce the release of melatonin earlier?
Well, basically, what we're doing in everything that's kind of set up there, you're trying to do it as best as the body can do. Does that make any sense? So those pieces, the stimulating part of the day, like the exposure to the bright light first thing in the morning. So 10 minutes first thing in the morning is actually the recommendation. And then obviously using light throughout the course of the day, and then using the dim during the evening time. So I suppose the dim light and the loss of the electronic use and not using overhead lights and using lamp light are all part of that, stimulating the natural process of the melatonin. Some of the foods that I mentioned there, like the banana, again, they send the messages to the brain to start promote. But again, it's kind of like, it's going to happen. It's happening within your body. You're just trying to kind of lead to it so that it's initiated. The same way as like having the cool bedroom, maybe having the shower or the bath again to use the temperature control. So everything that's kind of set out here is designed to help promote the natural release of melatonin at more or less the right time for the body.
Very busy kids, so we might have kids who are getting up swimming awfully early,
Yeah.
or we might have kids who are doing sports and homework quite late, and then getting up 6:15 for a bus into the city, that kind of thing, where their window, I suppose, for sleep is poor.
Yeah. Are you asking me for a solution?
I don't know. I suppose I'm saying it's a problem for a lot of people, but
yeah.
You know, what is there something to where would you give if you had to give anywhere?
It's hard to know, because you see, I suppose, let's not forget how important the sleep is. Let's remember the superpower that it has and what impact it has on every aspect of how our children experience their lives. So if sleep is a problem in the household, and we see lots of extracurricular activity demands, social demands, and of course study demands, sometimes it's a decision of what something might need to give, so that the sleep isn't the item that has to give. Does that make any sense?
It does to me, absolutely. I'm looking
These are in-house decisions, you know, like I have children that have trained late. I have children who have had lots of extracurricular activities, but at some point we've had conversations where things have to give.
Yeah. There's a question here. Given that adolescents are hardwired to pay attention and assign more value to the views and approval of peers, are any tips and tricks to help them access key self-care messages and that kind of thing through their peer group? It's something me and Lucy have actually been doing a bit of work on over the summer, and are hoping to have ready to go. Well, it's hoped to have done by now, but early in the new year, we'll be doing a new module for schools, actually, because it's not in the curriculum anywhere, oddly, right? This idea of sleep. So a little sort of teaching module, 3-lesson module called The Importance of Sleep. So lesson 1 would be all about sleep. Lesson 2 is going to be called My Relationship with Sleep, and lesson 3 would be How Do I Improve My Sleep. So it's going to allow teachers to go through this topic with young people in junior cycle. So that's your first year, second year, third year. And there's, various different bits and pieces, within that'll, pique their interest and interest them. And there'll be some kind of, good messaging and, showing the young people the importance of sleep for sport and sleep for self-image and all this kind of stuff that would appeal to them that way. So that'll be useful, but it's tricky, right? We know, broadly speaking, health education doesn't work terribly well. We all know what's good for us, but do we do it, right? As adults, we know that we should be doing X, Y, and Z. We should be running around the block 3 times a week and eating our 5 portions and doing all these other things that we don't do, or a lot of us don't do. So it broadly speaking, you can't educate good health behavior into young people. What you can do is provide the environment that will kind of modify things for them as well. So we're trying to do a little bit of both. We're going to provide that as a module, because it can be useful just to give people information, but it's not, it's a tough nut to crack, I suppose. But certainly, thanks for that. It was that came from Enda. So just moving on, what about oversleeping? There's a question that came in that there was someone who sleeps an awful lot, who's regularly getting his 9 hours sleep, but would then happily sleep, the rest of the day coming home from school. So, somebody that's maybe oversleeping. Have you come across that in practice?
Yeah, and I suppose, of course, we talk about these averages, 8 to 10 hours, with some people needing more, and of course, some people needing less, but those don't tend to vary hugely, okay? So I suppose I would always just look for a GP review for someone who's sleeping maybe much more than the hours prescribed, just to make sure that there's no deficiency there, like an iron or mineral deficiency. And then I suppose if you get a clean bill of health and the sleeping during the day isn't causing a problem with getting to sleep at night, you see, I'd be curious, are they sleeping all night? Is the quality of their sleep being impacted by the overuse? Because I mentioned at the start of the talk that we have quality and quantity. Very hard to really measure the quality because it's mood and behavior, it's how you feel, okay? And I suppose sometimes visually we see them looking tired, like dark circles under the eyes, red-rimmed eyes, and they look like they're getting enough sleep, but they don't seem to be getting enough sleep. So I'd be curious around other things that impact on the quality of sleep. We talked about caffeine earlier, and that impacts the quality of your sleep. Alcohol impacts the quality of your sleep. This is putting into a lighter sleep instead of the deep restoring sleep that we're looking for. And then, of course, come back to the original piece that I started to say, that if they are sleeping during the day, but they're still maintaining their sleep at night, then you may not have a problem. But I definitely would always get something like that checked out so that there's nothing hidden there that needs to be exposed.
Okay, thanks for that. Anxiety around seeming, or maybe even driven by not being able to get to sleep.
Yeah,
so that's
this is the thing that, it's that cycle. Now, often the anxiety that is presenting there might be another source, but it's just playing out when it comes to bedtime. They, fear of being on their own, don't want the separation, but there is likely I would want to get underneath what is the true root cause of that, so that the resistance, that anxiety might be a symptomatic of a deeper issue. And again, try to explore that with them as the parent, but it might be necessary to try and explore that with a professional as well, so they can start to develop, I don't really want to say coping mechanisms, but they can start to develop ways of managing, what they're experiencing, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and the sources of what's coming up for them as well. And just remembering that, like, all behavior makes sense. And I mentioned during this, to kind of see the meaning and the metaphor. So, not being afraid to go to sleep. What is it representing for them? What is that for that particular person? Only they know, but they may only be able to really discover that with the holding of the parent, or again, like I say, a professional who can help them get underneath that concern. But even just beginning with, slightly earlier onset of sleep, longer onset of sleep, looking at some of those coping mechanisms. I don't really want to call them coping mechanisms, but let's say the breathing exercises, just helping them to relax and to take charge of their thoughts and their feelings, and to learn how to do that. Keeping the journaling going so they can sort of dispel what's coming up for them at another, just before bedtime, keeping that diary sort of dynamic for them. So we're helping them ways of processing. Because it's a huge time. It's a huge developmental stage, adolescence.
Absolutely. I oddly enough, I have two questions that came in here, and they're sort of side by side. They came in roughly at the same time, but similar, super similar, but independent. And this is the idea of school start times, right? So
yeah.
One says, well, will the education system ever change to accommodate the fact that the teenage brain can't really help learn or retain information until their body clock starts later? Then another one, is there any truth behind the idea secondary schools should begin later in the morning time? And if so, what would be best for optimal learning? Are there any studies to back this up? There are actually lots of studies, I think, to back this up. There's a fairly good website. A lot of work went into this as a push in California, where they were starting school very early, in other parts of the States. But there's a website, letsleep.org, I think, is a pretty good website. And there's a lot of information and research and links to different things. It's a Californian-based website.
Yeah, but they would start, like, the start school later. And there was another one in the UK as well. I think it's run by a hub in Oxford University. Our school start times are what they're campaigning for, because the school start times, like in the States, were like 7:30, 7, whereas we are, obviously it's still too early for our adolescents. I don't necessarily see that shifting. If I'm honest with you, I don't even know how that we would get that groundswell. But I do know that the start school later campaign in the States was driven by a much earlier school start time than what we have.
Yeah, I think there are parts of places in Europe where they've tried later start times, maybe Germany. They've done some work, not across the country, but in pockets, and in Finland, I believe, as well. And there's really good evidence to back up this is a good thing.
There are, yeah.
This is a systemic change that you know, and you know how slow it is to change anything in Ireland. There would probably be a great, you know, benefit to starting school at 11 for young people, never mind the traffic benefits and all the rest. And they had their day from 11 to 7 and stayed in at school and had a meal and did some extracurricular activities and did their homework, and then their parents got them at 7 or the bus got them home at 7. That would be probably almost an ideal scenario. Get all that traffic off the road and life be easier for everybody. But trying to bring something like that in, you know, it's like Lucy said, it'd be a public, you know, groundswell of, you know, trying to make something like that work, and the teaching of that would be tricky, and you know, so many complications. But I'm sure there'd be merit in something like that, and where they've tried things like that, there's good evidence to back it up. That's good. Listen, we said we'd finish up at 15:15, so and we're pretty much on that. Have you any last thoughts or things to say, Lucy?
No, I don't. I need to remind myself we shouldn't do 2 nights in a row. Again, we did national school last night. We're doing the teens tonight, and I need to remind you we won't do 2 in a row next year because I find I'm too tired myself. Noted.
Thank you for that, Lucy, and thanks very much for your input tonight. Super helpful. I'm absolutely sure. Like I say, I think as we noticed, maybe some people are finding things a little bit choppy, or choppy as we went along. I'm sitting here watching this all as it was going along, and I had very little of that. I didn't find that it was choppy, maybe just once briefly. So what I would hope when I put the recording up on Friday, it'll be of pretty good quality for anybody that found it difficult, that they can look back at that. So that's what I'm going to do. Everyone will get an email on Friday. And thanks for your time tonight. And thank you, Lucy. Also, I'm going to hit the end, and that's it. We'll all be finished up. So thanks for coming. I hope you found it useful. See you on the other side. Thanks. Bye-bye.